Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'll be showing you what's new in GIMP 3.0. Let's get started. You can download GIMP for free as always from gimp.org. You'll notice GIMP now has a brand new logo. This is created by Ariam. She's part of the ZMarmot project, but you can come over here and click download. That's going to take you to the download screen. It should automatically recognize your operating system, and then I recommend going with the direct download unless that doesn't work or is very slow, and then you can go with either of these two options. Once GIMP is installed on your computer and you open it up for the first time, you should see the GIMP welcome window here. So aside from the really cool artwork here, you also have a bunch of links here. Moving on to the personalized tab. So a really cool feature here in GIMP 3.0 is that right out of the gate, you can customize the GIMP UI right here from the welcome window. So for example, under theme, you can change the color scheme. By default, it's set to the dark theme or dark mode. You can also go with some light colors here if you prefer, or middle gray. Light colors, easiest to see, but strains your eyes. Dark colors, best on the eyes. Everybody loves dark mode. You also have an icon theme here, so the default is going to be these symbolic icons. You can also go with legacy, which is going to be the older GIMP icons, which are also going to be full color. Let's go with default, and you have a toggle here that says use symbolic icons if available. You can toggle that off if you don't like the symbolic icons. I prefer leaving that on. Icon scaling allows you to increase or decrease the size of your icons. You can toggle that on, and now you can use the slider here. The slider won't be available if this is toggled off, but you can set this to small if you want the icons to be out of your way, or you can go up to large or even huge if you can't see very well and you just like to have your icons easily accessible and easily visible. I'll keep this set to large just for the tutorial to make things a little easier to see. You can also scale the fonts of your UI. So you can scale these down if you like things being very tiny and very hard to see. Maybe you just like having things out of the way and you want more room for your artwork. Or you can scale up, and that's going to make things easier to read. So for those of you who strain when you're using GIMP or other software, this should make it easier to see what you're doing. It should help out your eyes. Now it's all done right here inside of the welcome window, which is really nice. So you can change your language. By default, it uses your system language on your computer, but you can change it to whatever language you prefer. You can merge the menu and title bar, which are these two bars right here. By default, they are not merged, and you do have to restart GIMP for those changes to take effect. And finally, you can disable or enable the use of tool groups. So it's enabled by default. If I click on that, it will disable it, and now all of the tools are going to be individually displayed here. If you prefer to see all of your tools at once, now you've got that tool group option turned off, or you can turn it back on and now everything's nice and tidy. The Contribute tab allows you to contribute to GIMP in a variety of ways. The Create tab allows you to create a new document or open an image from your computer. More on that momentarily, but let's come over to Release Notes for now. But the Release Notes tab allows you to see basically the highlights of what's come out in GIMP 3.0. This is not a comprehensive or exhaustive list of all the features, but it does cover the important ones. And you'll see that some of these are just a standard bullet point, whereas others are going to have this little play button. If it has the play button, it means there is an associated animation that's going to show you pretty much exactly where that new feature is located. So for example, if I click multi-selection of layers in the layers dockable, it's going to show a little animation highlighting the layers panel over here, because that's where multi-selection layer features are going to exist. But let's come back here to the Create tab. So as I said, under this tab, it's where you can create a new document. So for example, I'll click Create, and here I can create a brand new image using whatever dimensions I want to use. Let's just click Cancel for now. You can open an existing image from your computer. So you can navigate here on the left side to a location on your computer, and then click and select what you want to open here inside this area. And you can double click to open it up or click the open button there. I'll click cancel. And you can always reopen the welcome dialog by going to Help, Welcome Dialog, and now let's come back here over to Create. So GIMP 3.0 also shows you your recent images that you've opened on your computer as a list right here. And you can either click on one of these images and you'll see that selected image will have just the slightest darker color on it. But you can select the single image, or you can control click to select multiple images to open up. Or let me just click on that first image. You can shift click and that selects all of these images. And then you can click open selected images real quick. You also have the option here to show on start. So if you don't want to show this welcome window every time you open GIMP, you can uncheck that option here. Anyway, let's come over here and click open selected images. And this is going to open up my selected images into GIMP. GIMP 3.0 now includes the very exciting and highly anticipated non-destructive editing features. That means I can now add image adjustments or filters to my images or to my layers. I do have a dedicated tutorial demonstrating this feature in depth, but let's just show a quick demo here. If I go to Colors, Curves, let's very quickly add a curves adjustment to this and click OK. Instead of that curves adjustment being applied directly to the image, or in other words, merging with the image layer, now we have this little effects icon here, and if I click on it, we get this brand new popover menu, and here we can see any filters or effects we've added to our image. The really cool thing about this is we can now double click on the effect, and now the curves adjustment will pop up with our previous adjustments added on here, and I can just basically continue adjusting this at any time. This includes during a current session as well as in a new session. So if I were to save this as an XCF file, close it out and come back to this like a week later, I can come back in here and make the adjustments to the curves, and I'll click OK. And now our curves adjustments have been updated here. And so we can see also a before and after. And this doesn't just work with image adjustments, it also works with effects. So let's go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette. And now we have our non-destructive vignette on here. This has been available since GIMP 2.10, but let's just readjust this very quickly and click OK. And now if I come back to effects, you'll see we have that vignette effect on here. It has the G icon for Gaggle. It's a Gaggle filter. A lot of really great features have come out of this layer effects feature. Again, I do have a dedicated tutorial showing this in action. GIMP 3.0 now rolls out with multi-layer selection features, and this is another hugely anticipated feature. So this composition has a decent amount of layers in it. And in previous versions of GIMP, I could only click on a single layer and then rearrange it or move it around, and I could only perform actions for the most part on a single layer at a time. But now what I can do, for example, is I can click on a layer and I could either control click to select another layer, and you'll see here it says 2 items selected. It's kind of glitching a little bit there, but it says 2 items selected, and I can keep going and it'll just keep tallying up the layers, or I can click on a layer and then shift click, and that'll select all those layers. And let me just click off these layers. If I create a layer group, let's name this Cake Top. So what I can do is shift click on these layers and then just click and drag them into the layer group and release. And so there you can see we can now very quickly move around multiple layers simultaneously. And something else we can do with these, if I hit the M key to grab the move tool, I can move these layers simultaneously, except we do have to first come over here to the tool options. You'll see under tool toggle, it says pick a layer or guide. If I just have that selected, it'll move whatever actual layer I click on, so whatever pixels are underneath the mouse. But if I hold the shift key, you'll see it'll switch over to move the selected layers. And now when I click and drag, it'll move all of the layers selected here in the layers panel. You can also simply click on move the selected layers to have that be the default behavior, so you don't have to hold the shift key down. And then when you hold shift, it'll just move the single layer. So let's switch that back to the default. So this also applies to transformations. If I hit shift T, that's going to grab the unified transform tool, and make sure you have composited preview checked. And then you can just click and drag and you'll see it's going to transform all those layers simultaneously. So if I hit transform, now they're all scaled. Let's hit Control Z. So you could transform multiple layers simultaneously in previous versions of GIMP. The main difference being you used to have to click a little chain link icon, and that would perform what's called a transform link. So whatever layers had that link enabled, they would all transform together, and then you would have to unlink those layers. And this was just a little bit unintuitive. I think this is a much more intuitive way to do things. This is more so what people are used to in the software they've been using for years and years. So this is definitely a huge improvement. And speaking of the transform link icon, which used to be located right here, now instead we have these new lock icons here. So you'll see we have 4 separate lock icons. Some of these used to be located up here at the top of the layers panel. Instead, you now have this lock icon indicating there are lock features here inside of this column. And so now you have the lock pixels icon, lock position and size, lock visibility, and lock alpha channel. These are all now located inside of here. When you click on the lock, you'll see if you just have a single lock selected, it'll show that icon here. If you have multiple locks for a single layer, you'll see that that will display a new icon, this multi-lock icon, and I'll click off of here. I do feel like if you have multiple layers selected, you should probably have the locks apply to all of them simultaneously. Maybe that's something they're working on for the future, but just know that those layer lock icons are now located here in this little popover menu. So another multi-layer selection feature is that you now have something called layer sets. This feature can be accessed by clicking the little search box icon here. And right now you'll see I don't have any layer sets stored. It says no layer sets stored, but I can create new layer sets here. And what I have to do for this is I have to select the layers I want to add to a layer set. So for example, let's say we want all the layers that have cake in them to be inside a layer set. And let me just grab the move tool real quick to get off the unified transform tool. So let's come back here and we're just going to shift click on all these cake layers and I'll click the search icon. And what I'll do is I'm going to add all of these layers into a layer set called cake. And what I can do now is just click this plus icon. And now we have this cake layer set, and you can delete the layer set by clicking this little X icon. I think this UI here could use a little bit of work, but that's all right. So what happens now if I click off of those cake layers inside the layer set, and let's say at a later time inside my workflow, I want to access those layers again, I can click on the little search icon and just click cake, and you'll see it says 8 items selected. So let's click off of that. If I scroll down, you'll see now all of those cake layers inside that layer set have been selected. So it's just a very quick way to store related layers, or basically categorize different layers in your composition and be able to quickly select all those layers inside the set. And one last feature with this, let me click on the search icon. Let's actually just get rid of the layer set. If I wanted to search for layers inside my layers panel by name, for example, let's add flame here, hit the enter key. That's going to highlight any layers that contain the word flame. So very similar to a layer set, except it's almost like a real-time layer set based on whatever search query that you use. So all of these layers, including the layer group, have been selected that contain that word. GIMP 3.0 now has improvements to the text tool. So the first new feature is very exciting, and that's the new outlined feature, or in other words, you can now stroke your text. So if I click on my text here, now under the tool options for the text tool, we have this style section. And you'll see if I click on the drop down, we have 3 options. The default is going to be the filled option. That's just your standard filling in the text with the color. However, you now also have this outlined option. So now you can purely have an outline or stroke text. And you'll see we have some outline options here. So for solid color, we can change the color of the stroke. And now we have a red stroke. But you can also add a pattern to the stroke if you prefer. And similar to some of the styling you would have available if you were to stroke a path, you have those options available here. I'm not going to go through all those right now, but you also have outlined and filled. So if you want to have both a stroke on your text and a fill, you can select that option. And the color is going to be this color here inside this box. And then the stroke color is going to be whatever color you have set here. Let's just really quick show you the dashes feature here. So there you can add dashes to the stroke. So the very cool thing about this is you can go back at any time and make adjustments to the stroke properties. So it is non-destructive in that way, as long as you don't convert the text layer to a standard pixel layer. Let's come back here and change the style to fill. Aside from that really cool feature, you can now show or hide the on-canvas text editor, which is this floating editor right here. Some people really don't like this. I find it a little bit confusing because it really only applies to whatever text is selected. So for example, if I select the birthday text and I increase the size to 150, that makes sense in the moment. But if I were to create a new line of text here, it reverts back to the 100 text size over here in the tool options. So some people find that confusing, like if they change the size of all the selected text here and then go to create another line of text and it reverts to these settings, that can be confusing. So now you can come over here and just hide the on-canvas editor, get it out of the way. Aside from those features, GIMP has also, according to its release notes, made many improvements to the internal text engine, and some of the results of these improvements include that fonts are now more accurately stored and displayed to users. I believe that means the quality of the fonts themselves are now a little bit better. Fonts in the same font family are better distinguished from one another. So if you have multiple iterations of a font in here, they're not going to all display the same. They will now display those nuances between the different versions. Also, the actual bold and italic versions of fonts now properly display. So here we have Times New Roman bold and then Times New Roman italic. So basically GIMP was essentially faking it before. They called it faux versions of bold and italic. Now they're not having to fake making a font look like its bold version. It's actually going to display the proper bold version. They've also improved font loading and backwards compatibility, again, according to the release notes, and text colors with floating point precision are now supported. And I believe they said they were just an 8-bit before, so I believe that means the colors in the fonts should now look better. GIMP 3.0 now has improvements to color space management. That means colors in general should now display a little better inside of GIMP. For example, GIMP now fully supports the Adobe RGB color profile. So if you're opening images that were edited in Photoshop with Adobe RGB as the color profile, it should now properly display in GIMP. And if you were to export that image from GIMP, according to the release notes, those colors should properly export. The color space information should remain intact. GIMP now also supports what's called a late binding CMYK workflow. So these are going to be the first implementations of CMYK support. So we don't have full CMYK editing inside of GIMP 3.0 as of yet. I do demonstrate that in a dedicated video, so I'm not going to cover all that entirely here. So let's cover now what the release notes refer to as shortcut and workflow improvements. So coming back here to this composition, the most exciting one in my opinion is that you now have essentially smart guides in GIMP. So I can activate these by going to View, and you've got two options. You've got snap to bounding boxes as well as snap to equidistance. So let's go with snap to bounding boxes to start. Hit the M key to make sure you have the move tool selected and alt click on this layer here. So now when I move this layer around, you're gonna see a little gray line there, and that is essentially smart guides. So what this is doing is it's snapping to the bounding boxes of other layers around it. So you'll see right there, it's showing us it's snapping to the bounding box of one of these shapes right here. So this is just a very quick way to line up your objects in your image or line up the layers in your image to other layers and objects. And I've quickly created another composition to demonstrate the other snapping feature, which is View, Snap to equidistance, and this essentially snaps once your object reaches the same distance as another object here. So you can see this very quickly tells us when all three of our objects are the same distance apart. Another workflow improvement is that they've changed how copying and pasting works in GIMP. So many of you have heard about the floating selections feature. Previously, if I were to click on this circle, hit Control C, and then Control V to paste, it used to paste it as a floating selection, but now it's just going to paste it onto its own layer. So many people didn't like the floating selection behavior of copying and pasting. They thought it was confusing. This simplifies things, makes it more intuitive, and makes it more what people are used to in other software. There are some exceptions to this. So for example, let's come over here to this photo, and let's say I grab the lasso tool, and let's just very quickly lasso around the fox and hit the enter key. So there's actually a feature with the lasso tool. If I hold Control and Alt, you're gonna see this little move tool icon. And now if I click and drag the fox and release, you'll see we now still get the floating layer here, the floating selection layer. So this was the old behavior of copy and paste. And now I can kind of choose what I wanna do with this. I can anchor it to the layer below. I can delete the floating selection, or I can add it to its own new layer. So let's just add it to its own new layer there. And let me hit Control Z to back up. The search actions feature got a little bit of an update. So if I hit /, it brings up search actions. This allows you to very quickly find layers, images, effects, adjustments, all sorts of stuff inside of GIMP. So for one, they now have the little help manual icon here on the far right. So more on that momentarily. So let's say I want to apply curves to this. And another new feature is it tells you exactly where that feature is located inside of GIMP. So now it tells you it's inside of the menu colors. So if I were to go to colors, you'll find curves right there. So this is just made to make things easier, especially for new users. But I can also click the little help manual icon, and because I have it set up, it may ask you in a pop-up window, how do you want to go about this? Just choose the online manual option. So now it takes me directly to the online manual, and now it's showing me curves, and it tells me information about curves. So just a very quick way for new users to learn about various tools in GIMP. And if I wanted to apply the curves, I can just double click on this. That brings up curves, and of course, as per usual, I can add the curves adjustment. Moving on, you also now have some new paint tool features. So if I access the paintbrush by hitting the P key on my keyboard, you'll see it's here inside the toolbox. For one, you now have this Enable Dynamics checkbox. So this allows you to enable or disable brush dynamics if you're using a tablet. GIMP now supports hot plugging, I believe it's called, tablets, which means you just plug your tablet directly into the computer and it should work in GIMP without having to do any special setup. And with that functionality, it should mean that you can use all of the brush dynamics found inside of GIMP when you're painting with a tablet. But if you want to use the tablet without dynamics, previously you had to find the dynamics off option here from the list. Now, simply uncheck Enable Dynamics and it'll turn dynamics off. You also have this cool feature called Expand Layers. And let's come over here to this composition. This means that as you paint with your brush, if you go outside the layers, it's going to automatically expand the layer as you paint. So just a really cool feature to stop your painting from basically getting cut off by the layer. And it's a lot more intuitive. If I were to uncheck this option and paint outside the layer, you'll see it just gets cut off there. So we can enable this, and we have some options here in terms of the behavior of how it expands. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but definitely an improvement there with the painting features. You can also now place guides off of the canvas. So previously, if you were to drop a guide right here, it just would disappear. But now when you drop a guide, it stays there off the canvas, and I can do that up here as well. So let's move on to some other tools in GIMP 3.0 that received updates. For one, transform tools now work slightly differently. So for example, if I hit Shift T on the keyboard, it now automatically activates the transform tool on the selected layer. So previously, once you grabbed the tool here from the toolbox, you had to click on the canvas in order to activate the tool on the current layer. Now instead, it just automatically activates it, and now I can get to transforming this in whatever way I want. I have noticed some hiccups with this. For example, if I'm done with the transform tool, let's say I hit the enter key and now I want to move on. If I come over here and I go to select another layer, that transform tool now automatically applies to those two layers I have selected. So just slightly different behavior there. Not sure if it's good or bad, and I'm not sure what the alternative behavior would be. The alignment tool in GIMP 3.0 has been totally reworked. It's a little confusing now, I'm not gonna lie. Is it better? I don't know. But it's different, and let's hit the Q key to grab the alignment tool. I think they're on the right track, and I think the reason it's a little confusing is because you also now have the multi-layer selection features in GIMP 3.0, and they're trying to make all this stuff work together. But essentially with this rework tool, you now have this little matrix right here, this little graph, and this allows you to select what part of the layer or the object everything is aligning to. So that's number one. You can align to the middle, you can align to the center left, the top left, etc. You also have this option here for selected layers. So this is just saying whatever layers I have selected over here in the layers panel, those are going to be the layers that align to each other. The weird thing about this is if it's unchecked, the alignment tool will not work. Everything will be grayed out. This is a mandatory option for this tool to even work. You also have this option here for use extents of layer contents, and that basically means when it's checked, it's going to align to the pixels in the layer as opposed to the layer boundary. And then I believe selected paths, when that's checked, means that paths on your composition are going to be part of the alignment situation, assuming that you have paths selected. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, you can select multiple channels and paths as well as multiple layers. So the multi-layer selection feature applies to paths. So let me just demonstrate this real quick. You'll see the little icons down here for aligning. So right now we have two layers selected. We're aligning based on the pixels in that layer, and we're aligning to the center of the layer. So now let's just align these two objects. So that's horizontal and vertical alignment, and now you'll see they are center aligned. Let's change this to the upper left just to sort of demonstrate a key difference here. So let's come back here and Let's just center align these. So we're center aligning these based on the top left corner of the pixels in the image. So you'll see there, they are aligning to the top left of each other's pixels. If I were to uncheck use extensive layer contents and do the same thing, so let's center align, you'll see there now it's going to align to the top left of the borders here of these selected layers. So definitely some very interesting behaviors there. Also under Align, you have this picked reference object option, and this is just supposed to basically set up the equivalent of a key object. So if I click on this black object here, the circle, you'll see that is now the reference layer. And now everything should align to that reference layer. Let's just go back to the center here and now come over here and just middle align everything horizontally and vertically. So now everything aligns to the middle of this reference object. So once you get past those first few hurdles of the user experience here with some of the checkboxes and everything, it actually is a very useful tool now. The Paths tool now receives some updates in GIMP 3.0. So if I hit the B key on my keyboard, that grabs the Bezier Curves tool or the Path tool. And first of all, if I click to create a path and then I click and drag, you're going to see this little tiny nuance feature, which is that we now have some directionality to that first node that's created. So now it's basically going to have a point to the end of this node indicating the direction that your path is traveling in. So that's a cool first new feature there. And let me just quickly draw a little abstract shape here. Control key and hover over that first node and you'll see that little union symbol, and we'll just click to create a union there, connect everything. So the next new feature is that over here in the tool options, we still have the fill and stroke options for this path, but when you click fill path, you're going to see a couple new options in here. So now it's going to ask if you want to use the foreground or background color, or you can fill this with a pattern. So let's just go with the foreground color and click fill. And if I click stroke path, we now have this new dialog, which is going to have two tabs here at the very top. So we have the line tab that allows you to stroke the path using a line. And now you have all of the options here for customizing the stroke around the path. So these features were available in GIMP 2.10. They were just laid out slightly differently. And these features basically from this point downwards were inside of an advanced mode dropdown. So now it just displays all of these options by default. So let me just change the foreground color here. Let's just go with the cake color and click OK. And we'll go with 10 for the line width. And we're going to change the dashes to normal dots. And before I stroke this, you also have the paint tool tab. So if you wanted to use a paint tool instead of using the line options there, you can select a paint tool here from the dropdown. And basically it's going to stroke along your path using the options that are available inside of, for example, the paintbrush. And you can also enable brush dynamics if you want. But let's come back here to line. And we're just going to stroke this using those options we selected. And now you can see our path has a dotted line stroke. And by the way, that new dialog setup is also available if you come over here to the Paths tab. So if you were to stroke a path from here, so we have this path selected, and we click this option here to paint along the paths, you will also see this two-tab approach here inside the stroke path dialog from inside the Paths tab. So just keep that in mind. A few backend features I want to mention. Number one, the GIMP GUI or Graphical User Interface library was updated to GTK3. And some of the results of these efforts is that there's better user interface scaling on high DPI screens. So if you have a smaller screen with a higher pixel density or a larger screen with even higher pixel density, like a 4K monitor or something, GIMP should now properly display on those screens, or at least display better. There's also a CSS theme system for GIMP, which means that users who know CSS coding should be able to more easily customize GIMP's user themes. As I noted previously, GIMP 3.0 runs natively on Wayland while still running on X11, and also in terms of GIMP's API updates. So the connection between GIMP and Darktable is supposed to now be fixed, meaning if you want to open up a raw image using GIMP and you have Darktable installed on your computer, Darktable will automatically open that raw image first. You can make edits, close Darktable down, and it'll open in GIMP. However, in my testing, I did actually get a plugin error on Windows. I'm gonna have to report that as a bug, so it doesn't quite work as of yet, but in theory, it should work. There's also been updates to the public API for scripts and plugins, and it does appear that developing scripts and plugins for GIMP has now drastically improved. So we should see in the future more plugins, more scripts. All right, that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell icon to be notified each time I have a brand new tutorial. You can check out any of the links to my resources in the description of the video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.